The woman was barely recognisable, lying in a ditch, bloodied, dying, cut and unconscious. The night for her had ended again. Her body remained in the bushes, hidden, dying. My introduction to the woman Unbeaten was direct and confronting. In the hospital bed where the woman lay, she couldn't speak. Weeks later, she rose from her wounds, got out of bed, and was taken to a safe house. She stayed there for a while, then returned to the home of terror that caused her this pain. The perpetrator, the man, he said sorry. The woman began the cycle of abuse again. A woman beaten, a woman unbeaten. This was the world I became to know as normal. Welcome to the 13 Elephants podcast. My name is Dr. Michael. Follow 13 Elephants and my story on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, and please subscribe to 13 Elephants on YouTube. I appreciate you all. I thank you all so very much for allowing me into your space to share the story. This is the 13 Elephants podcast. I am Dr. Michael. Come along for the ride. When I finished university, I finished my degree, my doctorate degree, in the School of Education in the Department of Human Development and Counselling. My supervisors were psychologists, and the specialty of interest that I focused on was Te Ao Māori, which in itself is working within a Māori environment, while I defined as Pākehā. What my thesis proved was there is the ability to provide a third space perspective within an environment where there are two contrasting entities or groups, let's say. Whether that be an in-group and an out-group, there's a belonging of one within that group. The degree I did prior to my PhD, to my doctorate, was a master's, and I did a master's in Indigenous Studies. The focus there was around understanding the different kind of cultures, ethnicities, ways of being, ways of thinking, and again, there was a third space perspective to that. The degree I completed before that was a sociology degree, essentially a social worker degree. I did that as a double kind of degree with Te Ao Māori on the side as well. So my understanding of what it meant to be a human being at that time for a 10-year period was based very much within a Te Ao Māori perspective as a Pākehā. When I left university or finished my PhD, I experienced my second divorce. I call it my second divorce because my first divorce was that of my parents. So my second divorce was the breakup of my marriage to my first wife. I finished university. I had completed my PhD. I was going through my second divorce. I had no money. I had 2 young children that I looked after every other week. There was shared custody. There was no food in the pantry. I had to get my sister to make me little food packets, which I ate while I had my kids. And when I didn't have my kids, I just didn't eat. I then got a job working for an organisation that specialised in working with children and women predominantly who had been either sexually assaulted or physically abused or in some need of care. The job I got was a manager for an area. I didn't know really what I was getting into at that particular time, other than I had an experience of knowing what it was like to work with people with some level of concern, whether that be through abuse or sexual abuse, or through financial abuse or emotional abuse from my studies. So when I began in this role of being a manager to, at the time, around 20 staff, it was an awakening for me. I hadn't been exposed to too much physical violence towards women, other than when I was exposed to my mother being physically assaulted by her second husband. That event stuck with me, and it helped me in a lot of ways understand how I was to work with women that were abused. The event with my mother happened when I was in my late teens, and my father got a phone call from my mother saying that she had been beaten up by her second husband. So my brother and I jumped in the car and went around to where my mother was living at the time, and we were confronted with a very disarming sight. My mother was in terrible shape. Her face was bruised, she was crying, and she had been violently beaten. My brother and I set about going to try and find the man that did this, as two boys would when they see their mother injured. And we didn't find him, of course. But at that time, I didn't give it too much attention, other than that this person that I loved and this person who loved me had experienced such pain, yet managed to still function. When I was working in this place, let's say, where I was charged with managing a significant team, coming through the doors on a regular basis were women who were beaten, and not beaten in a, let's say, light way, beaten in a extensively violent way. And this was every day. So every day, women would come through the door with the same story of being beaten, of being abused in some way, shape or form, whether it be financially, emotionally, physically. There was significant levels of harm that were caused to these women. When it got too bad, and I had to actually deal with the woman in a way that was over and above what counsellors could do, their stories unfolded in a very different way to how they did with the counsellors. When you hear stories every day for a very long period of time, for years and years, from different women, of the pain and suffering that has been mostly part of their whole life, you begin to get an understanding as a man what it is like to be in the presence of pain exhibited by a woman. For me, the third space perspective I developed over that time was twofold. Firstly, I had not my own understanding or knowledge of being physically abused, because I was never physically abused, but I had the firm understanding of what it was like for a woman to be physically abused. I also became very aware that when sitting across from a woman that was physically abused, that their story, when they tell it and when they told it to me as a man, was still centered around a power play. That I was a man, I presented as the entity that caused such pain and damage to this particular woman. I represented all things that were considered violent in that engagement with that woman. Yet the woman would share their stories freely, in comfort with me, safely with me. And these stories were were terrible stories, were violent stories. What I wanted to do at that time is get a much better understanding of how I would engage with these women. And predominantly, these women were Māori. So I attached myself to an organisation that was significant in helping women move through family violence. The organisation was called Te Whakaruru Hau Māori's Women's Refuge. I, being a Pākehā male, not having much idea really other than some experiences that were told to me about violence and how women shared those experiences, I had to walk into this place of powerful women, of powerful Māori women, and present myself in a way that I understood what their experiences might be like, so that I could learn about their experiences and behave in a better way as a respondent to women's pain. Every week I would spend an hour to 3 hours at Te Whakaruru Hau, in an organisation where it is all strong, powerful Māori women with histories of violence. Women that would go out with police every night and save tens, if not hundreds of women from certain death. They would jump in cars with police and go to the worst possible places and put themselves in the firing line of anger and abuse coming towards them from men, so that they could stop those men from injuring other women. In part, the external me represented those men because I was male. Yet I was welcomed into Te Whakaruru Hau. I was welcomed in there every week, and I sat with these women and I listened to their stories. And I did this for months, until it got to the point where I became part of them, where I was no longer even addressed as Dr. Michael. I was simply one of the wahine that were in the group, a white male, every week, talking with powerful Māori women about violence that was occurring for the community. So it became known, not only within circles, but also within me, that I could apply my third space perspective of knowing how to be a male and also how to be among women who had experienced violence. So when I was in practice rooms and the counsellors could no longer deal or help or work with the women that were hurt and injured, the women that were beaten, those women would come to me, and I would sit there and listen to their stories. And it became so normalized for me to be there, to listen, to understand the hurt of a woman, that I internalized that. And I became more aware of what it was to be a man and what damage a man could do to a woman. And from there on, I was unable to do anything but listen to women. My sole purpose was to ensure that I did not harm women. And I did this in a way which injured self, but it gave hope to me and to women, because I was there to share their experiences and help them in a way that was from a different perspective of how women can help women. It was from the perspective of how a man, a perpetrator on the outside to them, the image of someone that caused pain, how I was able to be also of help to them because they felt free. When I came across the event with a woman that was found in the bushes, beaten, dying, it was a significant and confronting event. She was in hospital for a very long period of time, and everyone thought she was going to die. But she didn't. She went to the safe house and she spent quite a few weeks in the safe house. She had kids, but she spent quite a few weeks in the safe house with the other woman, working through the issues, working through the pain. Yet the undeniable link she had to the person who caused the pain would not go away. And like many of the women that I have worked with over the years, it was the same story. The familiarity of hurt was something that's all they knew. So she went back, as many did. Back to the abuser's home, back to the pain and suffering, back to the terror. She went back. And I could understand that. I could understand how one feels comfort in pain. I could understand it because I had heard the stories so very often. I'd heard those stories about hope and dreams, and about wants and needs, and about wishing that things would change, and then they just don't. And when applying a third space perspective to that, as a person that's charged with the responsibility to ensure there is an outcome, there is a difficulty with doing that. Because the true outcome of working with women who are beaten is to recognize that they are unbeaten. That these women are unbeaten. These women have gone through and go through pain every day, every week, every month, and it does not beat them down. They are strong, powerful women. And I understood that from my time every week, every month, every year, alongside those women in Te Whakaruruhau who call me and I call them whānau, friends, forever. I continue to see these women. I continue to have a firm connection because they see me as not a male. They see me as a person in the third space that understands them and acknowledges that I am and do represent, in part, the abuser because I am male. For me, as a person, as a man, as a Pākehā, a white male, as a father, the balance of understanding what was okay and acceptable became blurred in terms of abuse. The constant narrative every day coming from those women that I worked with or the counsellors worked with, and I got to see when it got too hard for the counsellors or too difficult a case. The stories of them, because they were just so frequent and so terrorizing for them and so painful, the stories of them just became part of my normality. So there was nothing that was of shock to me anymore. Not death, not severe sexual abuse, not severe physical, emotional abuse. Nothing was of shock to me. And it placed me in a space where I had to please women. I could not stand up to women. I could not do anything but say yes to women. That caused difficulties for the woman that I was with. But for me, as a male, as a third space person, I could not do it any other way because I valued women so much. Part of working with women who are unbeaten is the acceptance that these women will remain unbeaten. Death is beaten. Although their everyday lives are of pain, although their everyday lives are terribly difficult, and although most of us can't really understand how they get through, the reality is they are unbeaten, and for them to be able to go through life and accept that there is hope and their dreams are alive and that they will remove themselves from this horrible space. For them to do that, there must be trust and understanding in something. And sometimes, just sometimes, that trust and understanding comes from a male. A Pākehā male working with Māori women who are abused. The unbeaten woman, the woman unbeaten. The third space allows us to look at different contexts and different situations with a much more clear understanding of what is right. That we as people move through our lives with these labels attached to us, with these names, these characteristics we must live by. Yet, when there's openness and engaging conversation about the lived experience, it makes no difference how we present on the outside. The most important part is that we are authentic, that we are true, that we are open, we share, we understand, that we care. We care about the greater good for people. I care about the greater good for people. There is damage, there is pain, there is difficult conversations and difficult events that occur when you occupy the third space. For me, the amount of times that I was called something that I am not because I had aligned myself with women, or I had aligned myself with the unbeaten woman. The amount of times that that was seen is not correct. I can't count. What I do measure being a third space individual by is what other people tell me who matter. I measure my authenticity of me by what other people tell me in terms of how I have helped them. A woman unbeaten is a powerful woman, and I respect that, and I understand that. My mother is a woman unbeaten. The woman that I work with, a woman unbeaten. It's difficult. It's very, very difficult to be okay with who you are and to share who you are when the person you are is not the person that you want to help. When you want to help yourself, there is some disparity between how you can do that and care given to others. Because you have to care for others, and in doing that, you must consider yourself. What the third space does is the third space allows you to identify yourself first and own who you are, and then to share who you are without trying to be anything else. I did that, and I do that. I may not be a role model at all, and I wouldn't suggest I am. But I do know that when I see an unbeaten woman, that woman is powerful. That woman is someone I learn from, I respect, and I understand. It stays with me, the visual, the memory, the eyes of the woman that we found in the bush. It doesn't go away. It reminds me that even when there is so much hurt and so much pain, even when somebody is hospitalized and everything is taken away and everything is gone and nothing is left, that there is some connection of love, or some connection of hope, or some connection to self that allows that person to fight, to carry on. I don't have the answer for how a beaten woman becomes the woman unbeaten. I don't have the answer. All I know is that it exists. I don't know how to stop pain that women experience. I just know that I know how to listen to it and have empathy and understanding from a third space perspective. I know how to be a participant in the process of care when pain is the focus. And that is the value of the third space. It's a learning place, one for growth, development, sharing and caring, where lived experience is valued. That is the third space. My name is Dr. Michael. This is 13 Elephants podcast. Follow me in my story of the lived experience on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcast, and YouTube. I appreciate you all. I thank you all so very, very much for allowing me into your space to share the story. Come along for the ride.